The Dark Possession, A Tale of Terror and Redemption. Written by P.J. Pryrose. Chapter 1. The sun was starting to set as Olivia, Jacob, Noah and Emma drove towards Cloudberry Lake. They were all excited to spend the weekend together in the cozy cabin they had rented. The four teenagers piled into Jacob's car, ready for their weekend at Cloudberry Lake. Olivia sat in the front seat, flipping through radio stations until she found one she liked. Jacob drove, keeping his eyes on the road. In the back seat, Noah and Emma chatted and laughed together. Olivia was Jacob's girlfriend, but she had been secretly pining for Noah for months. She tried to keep her feelings hidden, but sometimes they slipped out in the form of lingering glances or accidental touches. Noah, meanwhile, was oblivious to Olivia's crush. He had his eyes on Emma, his stepsister. It was a taboo crush, but he couldn't help how he felt. Emma was the quietest of the group, but her eyes held a mischievous glint. She liked to push people's buttons and stir up trouble, but only in a harmless way. She was excited to spend the weekend with her friends, away from her strict stepfather and the stress of her home life. Jacob was the de facto leader of the group. He was confident, charismatic, and always knew the right thing to say. He loved being in charge, but sometimes his arrogance got the better of him. As the car rolled down the highway towards Cloudberry Lake, Olivia reached out to change the radio station once again. Jacob, who was driving, quickly swatted her hand away. "What are you doing?" "I was listening to that," he exclaimed. "Ugh, Jacob, that music is terrible," Olivia replied, making a face. "Can we please listen to something else?" "No way, I like classic rock." "It's way better than whatever crap you listen to," Jacob retorted. Noah, who was in the back seat with Emma, chimed in. "I don't know, I kind of like Olivia's taste in music. Maybe we could switch it up a bit?" Jacob shook his head. No way. Classic rock is the way to go. Plus, it's my car so I get to pick the music." Olivia rolled her eyes. "Fine, but I'm not listening to this for the entire trip. We can take turns picking songs." As Jacob continued to blast his classic rock, the conversation turned into a heated debate about what kind of music was good and what radio stations were worth listening to. Emma, who had been relatively quiet until now, finally spoke up. "I don't really care what we listen to, as long as we're all having fun," she said, trying to diffuse the tension. Noah smiled at her. "That's a good point. Let's just take turns picking songs and try to find something we all like." The group settled into a compromise, taking turns picking songs and switching between different radio stations. As they sang along to the music and debated the merits of different genres, it was clear that despite their differences, they were all good friends who enjoyed each other's company. Chapter 2. The car was quiet as it cruised down the winding road, the only sound the hum of the engine and the soft breathing of Emma and Noah in the backseat. Jacob kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel. Olivia sat beside him, staring out the window at the passing trees. After a while, Jacob spoke up. "You know, I think Noah's got a thing for Emma," he said, his voice low. Olivia turned to look at him, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "I don't know, just the way he looks at her, you know? And the way he's always trying to make her laugh." Olivia shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "I don't think so. They've been friends since they were kids. Besides, Emma's not really his type." "What do you mean, not his type?" Jacob shot back, his tone defensive. "She's hot, smart, and funny. What's not to like?" Olivia shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe he just sees her as a friend. You know how guys are." Jacob snorted. "Yeah, I know how guys are. Always trying to get with the hottest girl they can find." Olivia rolled her eyes, her smile fading. "Whatever. Can we just focus on getting to the cabin?" Jacob nodded, his gaze back on the road. The rest of the drive was spent in silence, the tension between them palpable. "Hey guys, we need to stop for gas," Olivia said, interrupting their conversation. Jacob quickly pulled the car into the nearest gas station, which looked old and run down. Olivia was relieved to get out of the car and stretch her legs. A strange-looking boy with dirty clothes approached the car as they got out. "Hi, my name is Damian. Do you need any help?" he stuttered, his eyes darting nervously around the group. Olivia, Jacob, and Noah exchanged a quick glance and burst out laughing. Emma, however, was captivated by Damian's dark eyes and quiet demeanor. "Where's the bathroom?" she asked, ignoring her friend's laughter. Damian pointed towards the back of the gas station and Emma thanked him before walking away. Can you believe that kid? Jacob said as he filled up the car. What a weirdo. Noah nodded in agreement, but Olivia scolded them for making fun of someone who was clearly just trying to help. As they walked into the convenience store, Emma and Olivia went their separate ways to grab snacks and drinks. Olivia found herself gravitating towards the cooler, her eyes scanning the rows of sodas and energy drinks. But her mind was elsewhere, caught up in thoughts of Noah. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jacob was wrong, that there was something more between her crush and Emma. She sighed, grabbing a can of Red Bull and heading to the checkout. Jacob began filling the car up with gas, watching the numbers tick up on the pump screen. Noah leaned against the car, scrolling through Instagram. You know, that kid inside is weird, Jacob said, nodding towards the gas station building. Damian? Noah asked, looking up from his phone. Yeah, him, Jacob said. I don't think he's all there. He seemed nice enough to me, Noah said, shrugging. I don't know, man, Jacob said, finishing up with the gas pump. Something about him gives me the creeps. As they waited for the tank to fill, the conversation turned to the girls. So, you really think Emma's into you? Noah asked, a teasing grin on his face. Jacob rolled his eyes. I don't know, man. It's complicated. Complicated how? Noah asked, arching an eyebrow. Well, Olivia's my girlfriend, but I can't stop thinking about Emma, Jacob admitted, looking down at the ground. Noah chuckled. Damn, man. That's some soap opera shit. Jacob scowled at him. It's not funny. I don't know what to do. Hey, it's not my problem, Noah said, holding up his hands. You gotta figure that one out yourself. Jacob sighed, turning to lean against the car. Yeah, I guess you're right. They fell into silence for a few moments, both lost in their own thoughts. Then, Noah spoke up again. So, what are you gonna do after the summer? He asked. I don't know, Jacob said, shaking his head. I haven't really thought about it. Noah scoffed. Dude, we're graduating in a few months. You gotta have some kind of plan. Jacob shrugged. I don't know. Maybe go to community college or something. Community college? Noah said, incredulously. Man, you're too smart for that. You gotta aim higher than that. Jacob scowled at him. What, like you have it all figured out? No, but at least I'm thinking about it, Noah said, with a smirk. Jacob rolled his eyes. Whatever, man. I'll figure it out. Just then, Emma and Olivia emerged from the gas station's bathroom, laughing and chattering away. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as he caught sight of Emma, feeling guilty for thinking about her while Olivia was right there. Noah noticed his friend's expression and nudged him in the ribs. Hey, man. You gotta figure that shit out sooner rather than later. Jacob nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He knew Noah was right, but he didn't know how to fix things. For now, he just had to enjoy the rest of the weekend and try to put his feelings aside. After they finished filling up the car, they went inside the gas station to buy some provisions for their trip. Damian tried to help them find what they needed, but the group brushed him off, making fun of him behind his back. Emma turned to Damian and thanked him for his help. She asked him how far away Cloudberry Lake was and Damian gave her directions. The group drove off, leaving Damian behind at the gas station. As they piled back into the car, Olivia couldn't help stealing glances at Noah in the rearview mirror. She wondered if he ever thought about her the way she thought about him. But she kept her thoughts to herself, knowing that Jacob was watching her closely. Instead, she leaned her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes, letting the gentle motion of the car lull her into a half-sleep. Chapter 3. When Damian saw the group of teenagers at the gas station, he was drawn to them. They were everything he had never been: popular, carefree, and full of life. He couldn't help but watch them as they laughed and joked, filling up their car with gas and snacks. But then they started making fun of him, and the old feelings of anger and hurt flooded back. Damian watched as the car pulled out of the gas station, his eyes fixated on the back of the vehicle as it disappeared into the distance. He had never felt such a strong urge before, and he knew he had to follow it. Without a second thought, Damian got into his own car and began to pursue the teenagers. The roads were narrow and winding, but Damian didn't care. His eyes were focused on the taillights in front of him, and his foot pressed down on the gas pedal, propelling him forward. As he drove, He felt something stir inside of him. It was a darkness that he couldn't quite put his finger on, but he knew it was there, growing stronger with each passing moment. He tried to ignore it, but it was too powerful to resist. Damian had always been an outsider. Growing up, he was always the kid on the playground who was ignored or made fun of. He never fit in with the other kids, and his stutter only made it worse. It was no surprise to him that he ended up working at the rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere. But Damian had a secret. A dark secret that he kept buried deep inside him. He had grown up in a cult, where his father was a high-ranking priest. His childhood was filled with abuse and twisted rituals, and the only solace he found was in the dark, forbidden magic that his father taught him. The cult was located in a remote area, hidden away from society. It was a place of darkness, where evil deeds were performed in the name of their dark lord. Damian's father was a high priest in the cult, a man of great power and influence among the members. Damian grew up in the midst of this darkness, constantly surrounded by the rituals and sacrifices that were a regular part of life in the cult. Damian's mother was also a member of the cult, but unlike her husband, she never fully embraced the darkness that surrounded them. She had always been drawn to the light, even in the darkest of times. She had tried to shield Damian from the horrors of the cult as much as she could, but she knew that eventually, he would have to face the truth about his father and the cult. One day, when Damian was still a child, his mother sat him down for a heart-to-heart talk. She wanted him to understand the truth about the cult and the evil that surrounded them. Damian sat quietly, listening to his mother's words, trying to make sense of what she was saying. "Dami, you have to understand that your father is not a good man," she began. "He's done terrible things in the name of his dark lord. He's hurt people and animals, all in the name of power and control." Damian's eyes widened in shock. He had always known that his father was a strange man, but he had never realized the full extent of his evil deeds. "But why, Mom?" he asked, his voice shaking with fear. "Why does he do these things?" "Because he believes that it's what his dark lord wants," she replied. "He's been brainwashed by the cult and its teachings. But you don't have to follow in his footsteps, Dami. You can choose a different path, one of light and goodness." Damian nodded, his mind racing with thoughts and questions. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he didn't want to be like his father. He wanted to be a good person, to live a life free of the darkness that had surrounded him for so long. As the years passed, Damian's mother became his confidant and ally, helping him navigate the treacherous waters of the cult and its teachings. But even with her help, Damian struggled to escape the darkness that had been a part of his life for so long. And in the end, it was the darkness that claimed him, turning him into the monster that he had always feared he would become. Damian was lost in thought, remembering his early childhood years. He remembered the nights when his father would take him to secret meetings in the woods. He was only 5 years old, and the other cult members would perform strange rituals that left him feeling scared and confused. One memory stood out in particular, a painful memory that Damian had tried to forget for years. His mother was away on a trip, or that is what he thought. What he never found out was that she was taken care of in a hospital, after being brutally assaulted by Damian's father. It was the night his father had forced him to take part in a ritual that he knew was wrong. His father had been angry with him for some reason, and he had taken out his frustration on his young son. Chapter 4. As the group of teenagers drove deeper into the woods, the road became increasingly narrow and winding. The car jolted to a sudden stop as the tire burst, and the teenagers cursed in unison. They got out of the car and found that one of the tires had blown out. Jacob turned to the others. "I'll take care of this. Rest of you can start unloading the bags and food." As the other three began to unload the car, Olivia whispered, "I need to pee, guys. I'll be back in a minute." "Sure thing," Noah replied, but his eyes were fixed on Emma, and he hardly noticed Olivia leaving. Jacob lifted the spare tire out of the trunk of the car and placed it on the ground beside him. He looked around at the dense forest surrounding them and shivered slightly. It was getting dark, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Need any help?" Noah called out from the cabin as he and Emma disappeared inside. "Nah, I got it," Jacob replied, reaching for the lug wrench. As he began to loosen the bolts on the flat tire, he heard a rustling sound coming from the trees. He paused and listened, trying to identify the source of the noise. "What's up, man?" Noah called out from the cabin. "I thought I heard something," Jacob replied, squinting into the darkness. "Probably just an animal," Noah said dismissively. Jacob wasn't so sure. He felt a chill run down his spine as the rustling grew louder, accompanied by an eerie whispering sound. "Hey, I'm gonna go check it out," Jacob said, placing the lug wrench back in the trunk. "No way, man. You gotta finish changing the tire," Noah protested. "I'll be quick," Jacob insisted, striding towards the woods. He pushed aside some branches and stepped deeper into the forest. The whispering grew louder, and he could make out faint shapes moving in the darkness. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and Jacob stumbled backwards, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. He looked up to see a figure emerging from the shadows, holding a large branch. "What the hell?" Jacob exclaimed, scrambling to his feet. The figure said nothing, but began to advance towards Jacob, brandishing the branch menacingly. Jacob backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey! Help!" Jacob yelled, but there was no response from the cabin. The figure lunged forward, swinging the branch wildly. Jacob dodged to the side, but stumbled and fell to the ground again. He looked up to see the figure looming over him, its face twisted into a grotesque snarl. "Please," Jacob cried out, holding up his hands in defense. The figure raised the branch high above its head, ready to strike. Jacob closed his eyes, bracing for impact. But then, there was a sudden rustling sound, and the figure turned its head to look towards the woods. Jacob took the opportunity to scramble to his feet and bolt back towards the cabin, his heart racing. Jacob burst through the cabin door, panting heavily. "Guys, we need to get out of here. There's something out there, in the woods," Jacob gasped, trying to catch his breath. "What? Are you serious?" Emma exclaimed, looking worried. "I don't know who or what it was, but they were trying to attack me," Jacob said, his voice shaking. Noah and Emma had concern in their eyes. "What do you mean, something?" Emma asked. "I don't know," Jacob said, still gasping for air. "I was changing the flat tire, and I heard this weird noise. It sounded like someone was breathing, but it was too loud, too inhuman. I turned around, and there was this thing. I don't know what else to call it. It was like a person, but it was all wrong. It was all twisted and contorted, like it had been put together wrong." Noah frowned. "Are you sure it wasn't just your imagination playing tricks on you?" Jacob shook his head vehemently. "No, I'm telling you, it was real. And we need to get out of here before it comes back." As they were discussing what to do next, Jacob suddenly noticed that Olivia was nowhere to be found. "Wait a minute," he said, furrowing his brow. "Where's Olivia?" They all looked around, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Maybe she went for a walk or something," Emma suggested. "No, that's not like her," Noah said. "We should go look for her." Chapter 5. The cellar under Damian's childhood home was a place of darkness and dread, separated from the rest of the house with a door that creaked loudly on its hinges. The entrance was a narrow, winding staircase that led down into darkness. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, and the only light came from flickering candles that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The floor was uneven and rough, and there were no windows or any other source of natural light. The only illumination came from a few flickering candles that cast dancing shadows across the room. The air was thick with the scent of incense and other strange, pungent odors that made Damian's stomach turn. The room was so suffocating that he could barely breathe. The cellar was divided into two parts, separated by a thick stone wall. On one side, there was a small altar with an inverted cross hanging above it. The stone walls were covered in strange symbols and sigils, carved deep into the rough surface. On the other side of the wall was a large pit, filled with murky water that seemed to be alive with some unknown force. The pit was surrounded by a circle of black candles, their flames dancing in the shadows. In the center of the pit was a large stone pedestal, where Damian's father stood, his arms raised high in the air. He wore a black hooded robe and his face was hidden in the shadows. Damian's father, the high priest of the cult, chanted in a language that no mortal could comprehend. The air was thick with the smell of incense, and the temperature had dropped so low that the breaths of the participants came out as visible puffs of mist. Damian was kneeling in front of his father, his hands bound behind his back, as the elder man prepared to transfer the dark cloud to his son. Damian's heart pounded in his chest, and his mind was consumed with fear and uncertainty. "Do you understand what you're about to do, my son?" his father asked, his voice deep and menacing. Damian nodded, but he couldn't find the words to speak. His mouth was dry, and his throat felt constricted. Good, his father said, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made Damian shiver. Once the cloud has been transferred to you, it will be your responsibility to carry it forward, to spread its influence and bring about the end of days. Damian remembered the pain he felt as his father forced him to kneel before the pedestal. The stone was rough and cold against his skin, and he could feel the weight of his father's hand on the back of his neck, pushing him down. The water in the pit began to churn and bubble, and Damian could feel the dark cloud seeping into his body, filling him with an unspeakable terror. Damian's father raised a long, curved knife and held it over his head. He began to recite an incantation, and Damian felt a wave of energy wash over him, filling him with a sense of power and malevolence. "Do it," his father commanded, and Damian felt the sharp blade slice into his skin. He gasped as the pain shot through him, but he gritted his teeth and tried to remain still as the ritual continued. Damian would never forget the searing heat that had filled his body as his father had forced him to drink a foul-smelling liquid. He remembered the screams of the other cult members as they chanted in some unknown language, and the way their eyes had glowed with an unholy light. For what felt like an eternity, the chanting and the cutting continued, until Damian's father finally lowered the knife and stood back, his face shining with a manic glee. "Rise, my son," he said, his voice booming. "You are now the vessel of the dark cloud, and you will bring about the end of all things." As Damian stood up, he felt different. There was a darkness inside him, a cold and twisted energy that he couldn't quite control. But he knew that he had to try, for the sake of his mother and the other innocents who had been caught up in his father's madness. The memory was still vivid in Damian's mind, even after all these years. He could still feel the coldness of the stone, the weight of his father's hand, and the darkness that had taken hold of him. He knew that he could never escape the grip of the dark cloud, and that he would be haunted by it for the rest of his life. The memory of the pain was almost too much for Damian to bear, and he sank to the ground, clutching his head in agony. This room, this cellar, was a place of darkness and pain. A place where the cult performed their twisted rituals and Damian was forced to endure the unspeakable. It was a place that he could never escape, no matter how hard he tried. Years later, Damian would look back on that night as the beginning of his descent into darkness. But for now, he had to keep his secrets hidden, to bide his time and wait for the right moment to strike. As he grew older, Damian tried to escape his past, but the memories and the darkness followed him wherever he went. He tried to bury it deep inside him, to ignore the whispers and the voices that haunted him at night, but it was no use. The darkness was a part of him, and it always would be. As Damian followed the teenagers to the cabin, he couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. Longing to be a part of their group, to feel like he belonged somewhere. But he knew that could never happen. Not with what he had done, and what he was about to do. Finally, after what seemed like hours of driving, Damian caught sight of the car again. It was parked outside a cabin by the edge of Cloudberry Lake. The teenagers were unloading their things, laughing and joking with each other as they prepared to spend the weekend in the cabin. Damian watched from a distance, his eyes darting from one person to the next. He could feel the darkness inside of him pulsing, urging him to do something. He tried to fight it, but it was no use. Slowly, he made his way towards the cabin, his footsteps barely making a sound on the soft ground. As he got closer, he could hear the teenagers laughing and talking, completely unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Chapter 6. Olivia told the others she was going to find a spot to pee and disappeared into the forest. The trees were thick, the undergrowth scratchy against Olivia's bare legs. She wandered a few feet off the trail, looking for a suitable spot. Olivia stepped off the trail and pushed through a thicket of bushes. The undergrowth was thick and tangled, and she had to push her way through to reach a small clearing. As she made her way deeper into the woods, she caught a whiff of something foul in the air. The smell was pungent and nauseating, like rotting meat mixed with sewage. Olivia's stomach turned, and she covered her nose and mouth with her hand. She tried to ignore the smell and continued walking, but the stench only grew stronger the farther she went. As she approached a small clearing, she saw something that made her gasp. There, lying in the dirt, was the carcass of a deer. Its body was bloated and decomposing, covered in flies and maggots. The stench was so overwhelming that Olivia had to fight back the urge to vomit. She realized that this was what she had been smelling all along. She looked around the clearing and saw several more dead animals. It was like a graveyard for the local wildlife, and the sight and smell made her uneasy. Suddenly, Olivia heard a rustling in the bushes behind her. She turned around and saw a shadowy figure moving towards her. Her heart raced as she tried to make out who or what it was, but the figure was too obscured by the foliage. She panicked and ran, her footsteps pounding against the ground. She could hear the figure following her, its footsteps crunching on the leaves and twigs. She didn't stop until she reached a small clearing next to a fallen tree. Olivia turned around, the figure was nowhere in sight. She had been holding it for the past hour, but she couldn't wait any longer. As she squatted, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around but saw nothing. A twig snapped behind her. Olivia jumped up, pulling up her pants. Olivia noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. At first, she assumed it was one of her friends playing a prank, but as she got closer, she realized it was the strange gas station attendant, Damian, standing there, with a sinister smile on his face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking. As Damian watched Olivia walk into the woods, he knew that it was the perfect opportunity. He could hear the others talking, distracted by the flat tire, and he knew he had to act fast. And moved silently through the woods, his eyes locked on his prey. Olivia's heart racing with fear, she turned to run, but it was too late. Damian had already closed the distance between them and was now standing in front of her, holding a rusted garden tool. Olivia screamed for help, but her cries were drowned out by the sound of the woods and the lake. She backed away, but Damian kept coming closer, his stuttering voice barely audible as he muttered something unintelligible. "Please, don't hurt me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Damian only laughed, his eyes gleaming with madness. Olivia scrambled to her feet and ran, but Damian was faster. He tackled her from behind, and she fell to the ground. Damian put his hands around her throat and squeezed. Olivia struggled for breath, clawing at his face, but it was no use. Olivia knew it was all over. The last thing she saw was his dark eyes, now completely black. Her vision started to blur, as the world around her faded away. Chapter 7. Jacob, Emma and Noah ran out of the cabin, their flashlights illuminating the darkness. The forest was eerily silent. The only sounds were their footsteps crunching on the leaves and twigs as they went searching the surrounding woods for any sign of Olivia. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see that twisted, inhuman creature lurking in the shadows. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he was struggling to catch his breath. "Olivia! Olivia!" he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Where are you?" Noah's flashlight beam caught a glimpse of something moving in the undergrowth to their left. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emma was already scanning the surrounding trees, trying to get her bearings. "We need to stick together," she said firmly. "We can't let anything separate us." Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, and they all froze in fear. It was Olivia's voice, and it sounded like she was in agony. Jacob's heart sank. "We have to hurry," he said urgently. "She's in trouble." The three of them took off running in the direction of the scream. They followed the trail Olivia had taken, calling out her name, but there was no answer. The only sound was the rustle of leaves underfoot and the distant chirping of crickets. Suddenly, Emma let out a scream, and they all rushed to her. A grisly sight, Olivia's body lay crumpled on the ground, her eyes wide open in terror, her head covered in blood. Jacob's face turned white and he could feel bile rising in his throat as he realized what had happened. "Oh, my God! She's dead." Noah and Emma were equally shocked and saddened, and they stood frozen in disbelief. "We have to get out of here," Jacob said finally. "We need to go back to the cabin and call the police." As they run back to the cabin, they could feel the weight of what had happened sinking in, and they knew their weekend would never be the same. Emma and Noah sat huddled around the table, their eyes glued to Noah's cell phone screen as he tried desperately to get a signal. They had been trying to call the police for the past hour, ever since they had discovered Olivia's body in the woods. But the signal was weak and intermittent, and every attempt to make a call had failed. Emma looked up at Noah, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "This is hopeless. We need to do something." Noah nodded, frustration etched on his face. "I know. But what can we do? We're out in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help." "We have to try something," Emma insisted. "We can't just sit here and wait for the killer to come back." Noah looked down at his phone, trying once again to make a call. "I'll keep trying. Maybe if we go outside, we can get a better signal." Emma nodded, standing up from the table. "I'll go with you." As they walked outside, Jacob grabbed his jacket and headed towards the door. "It is getting cold, I go out to get some wood for the fireplace," he called out to them. Noah looked up from his phone. "Be careful out there, man. We don't know what's out there." Jacob nodded. As he stepped outside and made his way towards the woodshed, he heard a rustling in the bushes nearby, and froze. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice shaking. There was no answer, just the sound of his own heart pounding in his chest. He took a few tentative steps forward, peering into the darkness. Suddenly, a hand shot out from behind a nearby tree, grabbing him by the neck. Jacob struggled, gasping for breath, as Damian emerged from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come here," Damian whispered, his eyes glowing in the darkness. Jacob tried to scream, but it was too late. Damian raised a garden trowel and brought it down on Jacob's head, ending his life in a single blow. Chapter 8. Emma and Noah were still outside, trying to get a signal on their phones. Noah was pacing back and forth, frustration etched on his face. "I can't believe we have no signal out here," he muttered to himself. Emma walked over to him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure something out, Noah. We just need to stay calm and think." As they stood there, shivering in the cold, they suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream from outside. They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They had to go find Jacob. They rushed towards the woodshed, only to find Jacob lying on the ground, motionless. His head was twisted at an unnatural angle, and blood was pooling around his body. "Oh my God," Emma gasped, covering her mouth in horror. Noah quickly checked Jacob's pulse, but it was clear he was already dead. "We need to get back to the cabin," Noah said, his voice shaking. "We have to lock the doors and windows, and make sure we're safe." Suddenly they heard a noise behind them. Turning around, they saw Damian standing in front of them, his eyes black as coal. "You can't leave," he hissed, raising a gardening tool in his hand. Emma and Noah backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. They knew they had to fight back, or they would end up like Olivia and Jacob. Emma's mind was racing. They were trapped in the middle of nowhere, with no way to call for help, and now 2 of their friends were dead. She knew they were in grave danger, and they needed to find a way out of this nightmare. Emma and Noah were panting and their hearts were beating out of their chests as they ran into the cabin for safety. Emma slammed the cabin door shut and locked it. Noah leaned against the door, trying to catch his breath. "What the hell was that thing?" he gasped. Emma was trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know, but it killed Jacob," she whispered, her voice trembling. They huddled together on the cabin floor, unsure of what to do next. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of fear and something else. Noah couldn't help but feel drawn to Emma, even in the midst of such terror. He had to tell her how he felt, he couldn't hold it in anymore. "Emma, there's something I need to tell you," Noah said, his voice shaking. Emma turned to him, her eyes full of pain and fear. "What is it, Noah?" Noah took a deep breath. "I've had feelings for you for a long time now. I didn't want to ruin our friendship, but I can't keep it to myself any longer." Emma's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could respond, Noah leaned in and pressed his lips to hers in a soft, tender kiss. For a moment, the world fell away and it was just the 2 of them, lost in each other. Noah continued, "I know it's not the best time to tell you this, with everything that's going on. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you. I just hope that one day, if we make it out of this alive, you'll give me a chance." Emma looked at him, her eyes softening. "Noah, I don't know what to say. I had no idea you felt that way. You're my best friend and I care about you deeply, but I need some time to process this." Noah nodded, feeling both relieved and disappointed. "I understand, Emma. Just know that no matter what, I'll always be here for you." Emma reached over and put a hand on Noah's arm. "Thank you, Noah. That means a lot to me." But just as quickly as it had begun, the moment was shattered by a loud banging on the door, followed by Damian's voice. "Let me in," he shouted. "I won't hurt you." Noah and Emma jumped apart, their hearts pounding in their chests as they knew they were going to face their attacker. Noah grabbed a chair and barricaded the door. "We can't let him in," he said, his voice shaking. "He's not human." Emma nodded, her eyes darting around the room, searching for a weapon. "We need something to defend ourselves," she said. They heard the sound of splintering wood as Damian burst through the door and Damian's footsteps approaching. Noah grabbed a lamp from the table and raised it, ready to strike. As Damian lunged at them, they dodged out of the way, grabbing anything they could find to use as weapons. Emma grabbed a frying pan from the kitchen, while Noah grabbed a fireplace poker. They circled around Damian, trying to find an opening to strike, without success. He swung his gardening tool at them, narrowly missing their heads. Emma swung the frying pan at Damian's head, but he dodged out of the way. Noah lunged at him with the poker, but Damian grabbed it out of his hands and threw it across the room. Damian's eyes flickered with a deep, unnatural glow as he raised a blunt object high above his head. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she saw the glint of the metal in the moonlight through the window. In an instant, the object came crashing down on her shoulder, sending her tumbling to the floor. She screamed out in agony, clutching her arm as she writhed in pain. Noah rushed over to her, but before he could do anything, Damian lunged at him with a wild look in his eyes. Noah dodged just in time, but the blow caught him off guard and sent him sprawling to the floor. Emma watched in horror as Damian turned on them both, his expression twisted into a feral snarl. "Stay back," Noah shouted, scrambling to his feet and backing away from Damian. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Damian didn't answer, but instead advanced on them again, his arms raised high. Emma could feel the blood trickling down her arm as she struggled to get up, but she knew it was no use. Damian was too strong, too fast. Emma noticed something strange happening to Damian's eyes. They were starting to fade, returning to their normal color. "We have to keep fighting," she whispered to Noah. Emma tried to scramble away, but she was too slow. With a sickening thud, the object connected with her skull, and she crumpled to the floor. Noah lunged forward, but Damian managed to dodge Noah's outstretched arms and bolted towards the door. With a groan, Damian disappeared into the night. Emma felt dizzy and disoriented as she clutched her wounded arm, struggling to catch her breath. "What the hell just happened?" Noah said, his voice trembling. "What was wrong with him?" Emma shook her head, unable to speak. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The cabin was in shambles, and they were both injured. And worst of all, they had no idea where Damian had gone. Chapter 9. The cabin was a mess, the aftermath of a fierce battle between Damian, Emma, and Noah. The furniture was overturned, the walls were cracked, and the floorboards creaked and groaned with the weight of their struggle. Blood stained the walls, the carpet, and the furniture. Emma lay on the floor, her body battered and bruised. Noah was huddled in the corner, his face pale and his hands trembling. They both stared at the door, waiting for Damian to burst back in. But he didn't. Instead, there was silence. The only sound was the rustling of the wind outside, and the faint creak of the cabin settling. Emma groaned and tried to sit up, but her body protested. "Is he gone?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Noah nodded, his eyes wide. "I think so." They both looked around the cabin, taking in the destruction. Emma tried to stand, but her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the floor again. "What do we do now?" Noah asked, his voice shaking. "We wait," Emma replied, gritting her teeth against the pain. "We wait for help to come." But they both knew that help might not come. They were miles from civilization, with no phone or radio to call for help. They were on their own. They huddled together on the floor, waiting and listening. The wind outside grew stronger, and the cabin creaked and groaned even more. After what felt like hours, they heard a faint rustling outside. They both tensed, ready for another attack. "We need to find a way to get out of here," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't just wait for him to come back and kill us too." Noah nodded, his face grim. "But how? We have no car, no phone, and we don't even know where we are." Emma thought for a moment, her mind racing. Suddenly, she remembered something she had seen earlier. "There's a boat down by the lake," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "If we can get to it, we can row to the other side and find help." Noah looked at her skeptically. "But what about Damian? He could be waiting for us down there." Emma bit her lip, thinking hard. "We'll have to be careful. We can't just run down there blindly. We'll have to sneak around and make sure it's safe." Noah nodded, his expression determined. "Okay, let's do it. We have to try." They quickly gathered some supplies and headed out of the cabin, moving as quietly as possible. As they approached the lake, they could see the boat bobbing gently in the water. They paused, scanning the area for any sign of Damian. But the shore was deserted, and there was no sign of the killer. "Okay, let's go," Emma whispered, leading the way towards the boat. As they climbed in and grabbed the oars, Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. They were finally taking control of the situation. Emma and Noah pushed the old wooden boat into the water, both of them breathing heavily after the fight with Damian. The moon was full and bright, and the lake was like a mirror, reflecting the trees and the dark sky above. The air was still, and the only sounds came from the water lapping against the boat and the occasional rustle of leaves from the nearby trees. They started rowing, their movements synchronized, but they were both on edge, scanning the water and the shoreline for any sign of Damian. Noah tried to break the tension. "I can't believe we just fought off a psycho killer." Emma managed a small smile. "Yeah, well, we're not safe yet. Keep rowing." They rowed on in silence, their fear and exhaustion palpable. Suddenly, they heard a splash, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. What was that? Noah looked over his shoulder and saw something moving in the water. "I don't know, but we need to row faster." Emma picked up the pace, her arms straining with the effort. The boat cut through the water, but the splashing was getting closer. Suddenly, something broke the surface, a large, dark shape that made Emma scream. Noah turned to look, and his eyes widened in terror. "It's him, it's Damian." "Row, Emma, row." They rowed with all their strength, but the boat was heavy and sluggish. The splashing grew louder, and they could hear Damian's rasping breaths as he drew closer. Emma was crying now. "We're going to die, Noah. He's going to kill us." Noah tried to calm her down. "Just keep rowing, Emma. We can make it." Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and the boat rocked violently. Emma was thrown forward, hitting her head on the edge of the boat. Noah reached out to catch her, but the boat capsized, and they were plunged into the cold water. They came up sputtering, gasping for air, and saw Damian standing on the shore, watching them with cold, dead eyes. They started swimming towards the other side of the lake, but they knew they wouldn't make it. They were exhausted, and the water was so cold. Noah grabbed Emma's hand. "I love you, Emma. I always have." Emma looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, Noah." They kissed, their lips cold and salty from the water. They managed to turn the boat around, and Noah helped Emma to climb aboard. As Emma tried to pull Noah back into the boat, a hand reached out from the water and grabbed Noah's ankle, pulling him under. Emma screamed in terror as she saw Damian's face breaking the surface of the water, his eyes wild and filled with rage. "Help me, Emma," Noah cried. She grabbed a paddle and swung it at Damian, hitting him hard on the side of the head. But he didn't let go of Noah, and instead, pulled him deeper into the water. Emma reached out again, but Damian pushed her away once more. This time, she lost her balance and fell back into the boat. As she struggled to get up, she saw Damian drag Noah further out into the lake. "Noah!" she screamed. And then, with a sickening gurgle, Noah's head disappeared under the water. Chapter 10. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she saw the person she loved more than anything, lying dead in the water. But Damian was not finished. He lunged out of the water, grabbing Emma's arm and pulling her into the water. She kicked and fought, trying to get away from him, but he was too strong. Emma felt the icy water close around her, the darkness closing in. She saw Damian's face, twisted in anger and hatred, and knew that she was going to die. But just as she was about to give up, she felt a sudden burst of strength, and managed to break free from Damian's grip. She swam towards the shore, feeling the water growing warmer as she got closer. She stumbled out of the water, her body shaking and her heart racing. Emma was frozen with horror as she watched Damian disappear into the depths of the dark lake. The water was so calm now, it was hard to believe the chaos that had just occurred. She couldn't comprehend what had just happened, and tears streamed down her face as she gazed at Noah's body. Why? Why did he do this? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the sound of the waves lapping against the rocks at the shore. Emma was in shock. She wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, anything. But she knew it was too late. Damian had killed 2 of her friends in cold blood, and now that she finally understood her love for Noah, he was gone. She looked around frantically, searching for any sign of him, but there was nothing. The lake was eerily quiet. Emma's mind raced as she tried to think of what to do next. Although she felt a wave of grief wash over her, she knew she had to stay strong. She had to get out of there and find help. As she turned her head, she saw Damian standing on the shore, his black eyes locked on her. She could feel his gaze piercing through her, and she shuddered. She knew he was responsible for Noah's death, and she could feel the anger boiling inside her. She was determined to make him pay for what he had done. Emma's body trembled with exhaustion as she stumbled onto the beach. She collapsed on the sand, gasping for air as she looked up at Damian and his eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. "You can't hide from me, Emma," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "I'll find you wherever you go." She knew she had to keep moving, to keep running, but her legs were heavy and her lungs burned. Emma spotted the small boathouse off to the side. With nowhere else to go, she bolted towards it, hoping to find something to defend herself. She slammed the door shut behind her and frantically searched for anything she could use. Emma ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder, leading Damian into the boathouse. Inside, it was dark and musty. The smell of damp wood filled the air. Emma frantically searched for a weapon, but all she found were old fishing nets and rusty tools. She could hear Damian's footsteps getting closer, and her heart raced with fear. "You should have joined us," Damian hissed, grabbing Emma by the hair and dragging her toward the shore. "You could have been part of something greater than yourself." Emma struggled against him, tears streaming down her face. "I'll never be part of something like that. I won't let you hurt me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Damian chuckled. "Hurt you? Emma, I'm trying to save you." Suddenly, she saw it. The boat hook. She grabbed it and turned around to face Damian. "You're not invincible," Emma said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I'll stop you, no matter what." Damian laughed. "You don't understand, Emma. You never will." Emma clutched the boat hook tightly, like a talisman, ready to defend herself. She had to end this once and for all. A low growl came from outside the door as Damian pounded against it. Emma took a deep breath and waited. The door shook and creaked under the force of Damian's assault, but it held. Suddenly, there was a loud snap and the door burst open. Damian charged towards her with his eyes blazing and his movements fluid. Emma braced herself and swung the boat hook, striking Damian in the chest. "I'm not afraid of you," Emma said, her voice shaking but resolute. Damian lunged at her, but Emma was quick to dodge his attack. She swung the boat hook, hitting him in the side of the head. He stumbled back, but quickly regained his balance. "You can't hurt me," Damian said, his voice dripping with confidence. "I'm invincible." Emma narrowed her eyes, determination burning within her. She had to find a way to defeat him. He stumbled back, but quickly regained his footing and lunged towards her again. The fight continued, with Emma managing to fend off Damian's attacks with the boat hook. She could feel her energy draining with every blow she struck, but she refused to give up. As they circled each other in the cramped space, Damian's foot caught on a fishing rod and he tumbled to the ground. Emma swung the boat hook with all her might, impaling it deep into Damian's chest. He let out a deafening scream, collapsing to the ground. He gasped for breath and looked up at her with pleading eyes. "I am finally free," he whispered before his body went limp. Emma fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had lost so much. Her friends, her loved ones. But at least she had put an end to the terror. Emma looked down at Damian's lifeless body and felt a sense of relief wash over her. The killer was dead, and she had avenged the deaths of her friends. Emma stood up, panting and covered in blood. She couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to commit such atrocities. She had never seen anyone with eyes as black as his, and she knew that there was more to his story than met the eye. Finally, outside of the boathouse, Emma looked up at the sky, breathing in the crisp, fresh air. It was finally over. As she turned around to head back to the cabin, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A dark cloud was rising from Damian's body, swirling and pulsating in the night sky. Emma watched in horror, the cloud descending towards her, engulfing her in a whirlwind of darkness. She felt something enter her body, and she knew it was the same thing that had possessed Damian. For a moment, Emma felt a surge of power coursing through her veins, and she knew that something had changed inside her. She was no longer the same person. She knew that she would never be able to forget what had happened at Cloudberry Lake. At the same time, she understood that there was only one way to get rid of the darkness that now possessed her.